right, what is up everybody? I hope you're doing well. Today we are checking out the Electron Brothers Brass Knuckle High Voltage All Tube Overdrive. This was sent to me all the way from Australia. It is an authentic high voltage tube overdrive. It literally has authentic tube amp topology. It starts at 12 volts. But it ramps up to, and I don't know how they do it, I didn't build it, but it ramps up to between 240 and 290 volts internal with two 12AX7s. So for all intensive purposes, this is a high voltage tube overdrive preamp. Now, as far as I've read and can understand, it's optimized to work better to the front end of an amp or obviously play nicely on a pedal board. As far as how it takes pedals to the front end, because it has that topology, you can slam it with pretty much whatever you want at the front, either fuzz pedal, boost pedal, whatever you dig, you can hit the front end of it. But on the output side, yeah, it's more optimized to work on a pedal board, and we'll get into all of that. But the most impressive thing for me, and it does feel really great, and it does sound really good, but it's impressive to see something like this running in upwards of 290 volts internal, and it's a stomp box. Okay, so what's going on with this thing? It has that typical British amp thing going on. So think anything from like the 60s all the way to the 80s with maybe a little bit of the modified British thing in the 80s. At least that's what I'm hearing. It's capable of all of those sounds. It has a very similar tone stack. To me, it was really apparent as I started just discovering it and dialing it in. It's a very British tone stack, and we'll get into that in the demo so you can hear it. So what's going on the top of this pedal? You've got, as I mentioned, a classic tone stack. So high, mid, lows. We'll get into how all of that sounds in the demo. They're very interactive. And like I said, very typical of that British style tone stack. You have your gain. We know what that does. We'll check out the range of that in the demo. You obviously have your level control that will go from 0 all the way to quite a bit above unity gain. We'll check that out. You've got 3 switches on the top. 2 of them are 3-way switches. On the right, you have a fat switch. It does exactly what you think it does. We'll get into it in the demo, but if you throw it to in this case, to the left, you're going to get a little bit more mids. If you throw it to the right, you're going to get even more. And it's not just mids, but we'll check it out in the demo. You have a response switch, which is going to be more focused on the low end. If you throw it to the right, you're going to get a little bit more low. If you throw it to the left, you're going to get a lot more lows. And once again, that's interactive. We'll get into how that works in the demo. And then on the left side, you have a bright switch. Now, it's really a bright cap. We'll get into it in the demo. If you run this pedal at lower levels, like below unity, it might sound a little bit darker. So to compensate for that, just like you would on a vintage amp there, you can do like a bright cap essentially. So we'll get into how that sounds, but that's what that is. You'll hear it in the demo. It's actually a really nice feature depending on how you run the pedal. It's nice that that's there. And then of course, you've got your on and off switch, ins and outs, top of the pedal. It runs at 12 volts. I believe it's 600 milliamps. So yeah, without further yammering on, which I tend to do, here is the Electron Brothers Brass Knuckle High Voltage All Tube Overdrive. All right, what's this thing sound like? Here's just the guitar into the amplifier. And here is the brass knuckle. Okay, so just goofing around a little bit, tweaking the controls. One thing I noticed right away is just starting from noon, just by manipulating the high end and really just throwing the switches from the response switch to the fat switch. I didn't even touch the bright switch, and there's a reason for that, but we'll get into that. But just like making minor moves and then just throwing the switches, like I say, either fat or the low end kind of response switch, got me where I needed to go really quickly. But I think what I want to do right now is I'm going to leave the gain about there, and I'm just going to go ahead and sweep the tone stack so you can hear it. So right now I'm just slightly above unity or the level of the clean tone. So the highs, it can definitely get into that almost plexi territory, especially if you crank it all the way up. If you do that, it is interactive, so you're going to hear less of what the mid and lows are doing. But at the same time, if you have the highs down a little too much, then the mid and low can actually almost overwhelm your top end. I like it around right there. So that's what the high's doing. Let's listen to the mids. Mid. The mid control does what you think it would do. It adds mids, but it also, within this type of tone stack, if you dime it, as I showed you, it's also going to create upper mids and volume. I'm not noticing like a ton more gain or overdrive, but I am noticing volume. There's probably some perceived saturation there. I didn't design the circuit. I don't know how to build pedals, but I'm just telling you what I hear. I dig that circuit too, and that's a kind of chef's choice. It just depends on what I'm doing. For solo passes, maybe a little hotter. It just depends on how it's dialed. So there's that. The low potentiometer is really more subtle. I look at it more as almost a low end cut, just because I've got so much room here in the response. But let's sweep that. It's absolutely apparent. So I guess I shouldn't say it's like overly subtle, but it's totally apparent, but it's not super active. And you have this response switch here, which is going to bring in a bunch of lows, and then this actually becomes something you would almost attenuate with. But that's what that's doing. While I've got these all at noon, I'm going to go ahead and start with the fat switch. So in the center, I'm assuming that's neutral. To the left is a little bit more, to the right is even more. So that's the center. To the left. To the right, even more. So it just depends on how you're using it. I really dig that, obviously, for single note solos. If you're using a lot of single coil pickups, that comes in really handy. That's what that's doing in the mids. Let's check out the response. So in this case, to the right will be less, to the left will be more. Now to the right is even more. And that gets pretty massive, but in this case, if I like that type of almost subharmonic low, but it's maybe taking up a little bit too much space for me. I mean, just sitting and playing by myself, it's cool, but in a mix, it would take up too much space. So that control becomes very interactive with the lows control. These two, the way all of this interacts is really cool. Once you get to know the pedal, it's very useful in the way the two three-way toggle switches and the tone stack interact with each other. Let's look at gain. Obviously, you shut the gain off, nothing's passing through the circuit. So I wouldn't consider this like high gain. I would consider it like modified 80s Marshall. It's pretty saturated and really gratifying. It's a good sweep in the gain. It will clean up. I can get it to clean up, obviously, but I think of it more as like it's either a little more tame or it's out to get you, so if that makes any sense. But that's the gain sweep. I dig it. I like to keep it about right there and then just manipulate. I instinctively went to the lows when I cranked the gain, just like you would on any tube like classic tube stack thing, tone stack tube driven thing, I immediately reach for the lows and grab some highs. Last but not least, let's look at this bright switch. It's basically a bright cap. So right now where I have the level, it's going to be less apparent. Think of it as, you know, as you turn down an old Marshall, it's going to get dark. So you need like a bright cap thing, or it's going to sound like it's kind of underwater, if that makes any sense. Now, if I turn the level all the way up, and I hope I don't blow anything up. So that's really there to bring out clarity if you're going to run the level lower. So it was fairly apparent where I had the level, which was slightly above unity gain. It's almost bringing in lows and some mid highs along with everything else. If I turn the level up higher, way less apparent. So it's there if you're going to run your level, say here. It's way more apparent, but essentially from what I can understand and the way I'm hearing it, it's kind of a bright cap thing, and it's really there to compensate for loss of top end if you're going to run that level softer for whatever reason, depending on how you're using this pedal. So I hope I haven't missed anything. I don't think I have. One thing I didn't mention is because you guys can't feel what this pedal feels like. I can tell you that it feels like a really great, like I'm plugged into a really nice full-featured high voltage tube preamp. It's got just the right amount of sag. Like I said, the way everything interacts is pretty, I think, vintage in nature. These resonance and fat switches are great. The bright switch comes in really handy. Obviously, if you're going to run that level lower. But yeah, that is the Electron Brothers Brass Knuckle High Voltage All Tube Overdrive. If you've got any questions about this pedal, especially about where everything sits kind of in the tone stack, go to the website and check it out. You'll find all your information there. And as always, I really appreciate you guys watching, and I will see you on the next one.